Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Akroo Diary of a CTO series. Akroo is a live learning and career development platform for tech teams. We'll be launching very soon, so please check out our waitlist at akroo.io. Today, we are joined by Martina Iglesias Fernández, CTO at Roadie. Martina has had a varied and exciting career to date, ranging from research to professional services, and she also spent nearly 5 years at Spotify. Roadie is a hosted service catalog and developer portal based on Spotify's Backstage. Martina, thank you very much for joining us. And firstly, congratulations on becoming the CTO at Roadie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm super excited about this new role.
Amazing. So maybe we can kick off if you want to tell me about your professional journey and what led you to this point.
Right. So as you said, I started working in university at the same time as I was studying. I was doing I was working on research projects, and mainly that work was done alone with a little bit of help from supervisors. And when I finished university, I had the opportunity to stay and do more research, but I decided that that was very lonely for me, and I wanted to also see what other things awaited for me in the private sector. So I joined one of these big consulting companies, right? And I worked on projects that were very interesting. I was collaborating with very different people, outside of university, working with people that were much older than me. And that was really nice. At some point, I managed to get interviewed and pass the interviews for Spotify. So I did work there for about almost 5 years. And I was a backend engineer, and I learned immensely from those years, not just about technical things, but also learning about how to organize effectively, collaboration, agile practices. Well, I cannot list everything really. And after that, I've worked in a couple of three small startups, which has also made me learn a lot, because then you have to actually get closer to the business side, get closer to the users, get closer to the leadership people. And it's been also super, super interesting.
Amazing, thank you. And when did you make the decision to pursue a technical career, and why?
Well, okay, so that's a bit of a long story. When I was quite young, my parents gave me a microscope as a present for my birthday, and because I've always been a very curious person, and I used to play with that microscope a lot. I used to go to like lakes and gather water samples and examine them in my microscope, and I thought I wanted to be a biologist because I really loved investigating how the little microscopic creatures were behaving and so on, and analyzing that and learning about animals. I always had that kind of passion. And then later on, when I was 14 or 15, because my father was a telecommunications engineer, and he taught me how to program. And I tried that, and I really liked it as well. And I remember I had a couple of projects when I was a teenager, and I just got this obsession for programming, right? So I wasn't sure what to do between studying something around computer science or biology for a couple of years. And then I decided that computer science was going to be a really good choice, because they had many employment opportunities in Spain at the time. So that's how I decided to go for that. And I always cared about understanding systems and how things work, and understanding how computers work was also another big motivation for me.
Amazing. And do you still code now?
Very little, to be honest. I would like to do it more, but I think I need to dedicate time to other tasks, taking care of my team, talking to customers, and I think that's more important. So what I try to do to stay a little bit in touch with coding is that I try to do tasks around developer experience. Like if I see something that I could do to improve the experience of developing in our platform. I'll try to do that, or things around analytics. So work around the critical path and making sure I'm never like blocking any critical work that we need to deliver.
Amazing. And what informs your decisions when you are choosing a programming language and design framework for a product?
Interesting. I think that's a complicated choice as well. I think traditionally, I've heard many people saying that to choose the language for the project, you need to think about the qualities of that language or the framework and see if that adapts to the project. I think it is a little bit more complicated than that. And making that choice is not only about that specific project or problem that you're trying to solve. You need to also think that that project is probably not going to be built in isolation, but rather is going to live in an ecosystem because you're probably part of a bigger organization. So something important that one needs to think about is that, okay, you're going to build a new project, and if you choose a completely different language for it compared to what the rest of the organization is using, you may be running into, first of all, unknown problems that you haven't seen before. You won't have, or perhaps someone in the developer experience team supporting you. You may not have any platform support either. There are a lot of problems that you have solved as an organization. I can imagine like CI/CD, deployments, even client frameworks if you are talking about the microservices architecture. And if you try to reuse as much as possible what the others are using, you will get that extra help and support. And I think that's important because this project is solving a business need, but another business need is speed. Also, I think when you build a new thing, you're not the only team who is going to, or the only person who is going to touch it. So thinking about, are we going to grow a lot? Are we going to hire quickly? If we need to hire, it's probably easier to hire for JavaScript or Java engineers than for Rust engineers, even though Rust is more hip and cool. So all of these things have to be taken into account, in my opinion, to make mature choices in an organization that is growing.
Amazing, thank you. And how do you keep up to date with the technology trends?
I think I don't put a lot of effort into that. I think I've been very lucky that I've met people that like to talk about those things. So I kind of get that knowledge just by keeping in touch with people. I think I've also been very lucky that I have worked in companies that were always a little bit edgy and kind of industry leaders in certain aspects. So for example, I think Spotify was an industry leader, not just in technology, but also in agile methodologies and ways of working. And then, for example, WeForks is also very, I think they are leaders in the GitOps, let's say, discipline or methodologies as well, and Kubernetes and all those things. So just by being lucky to work on those companies, I've been keeping track of all these trends, I think.
Amazing. And have you brought those trends kind of with you now to Roadie?
Yeah, definitely. Also, I think conferences are a good way. Going to big conferences can, like KubeCon, for example, can be very interesting to keep track of those.
Cool, amazing. And so what does an average day look like for you when you're working?
An average day, a few meetings, talking to my team, making sure that everyone is doing fine, try to coach some people, what else, talking about their careers, what they need, what motivates them, meetings with customers, understanding their feedback, their needs, and so on. There is a little bit of thinking work to do as well. and a little bit of administration kind of work, and trying to think about, for example, we have retrospectives every 2 weeks, using that information to see what processes I need to adjust, if we need to adjust policies, or I'm just doing admin work like approving vacations and doing a little bit of planning ahead and things like that.
Cool.
So a bit of management.
Very good. And what has been the biggest challenge you've faced since taking on the role of CTO?
I would say time management. I think every time I kind of started to have more impact in a way, because perhaps I was a backend engineer, but then I was involved in other projects and so on. Every time you increase responsibilities and impact, you automatically have more sources of work. And every time I had to improve my prioritization skills and my time management skills. I mean, right now, as I said before, I talk to customers, I talk to the team, I talk to the chief of staff, I talk to the CEO, and all of that are like different topics that I need to keep in my head, and deciding what's most important and urgent in a single day becomes a little bit more tricky to know. So practicing that, reading, getting coaching is super important. Also, I think being comfortable with unfinished tasks is something that I'm working on as well. Not every day I'm going to leave my desk with everything that I wanted to do completely done. And I need to get comfortable with the idea that the next day I will need to continue some things, and that's all right.
Amazing. Has that helped with prioritization?
Yes, it makes you think more about what things can I leave undone and what things cannot be left incomplete after a day.
Very good, thank you. And how do you create a culture of psychological safety for your tech teams?
Right. There are a few things to do here. One thing I try to do is be vulnerable in front of the team, admit my mistakes, ask silly questions or dumb questions, making sure that everyone is comfortable to ask those silly questions as well, so that they feel safe to ask them and make sure that they have the context they need to then make decisions. I also try to encourage systems thinking, so that one would assume that everyone has or everyone wants to do the right thing. And if they're not doing the right thing at a certain time, it's because the process or the system is not really helping them do that. So you need to go back, and instead of perhaps punish that person for not doing the right thing, you need to think, okay, what can we change in the process so that next time you're encouraged to do the right thing instead? So that goes into like blameless culture. We have blameless postmortems. I think we are pretty humble in general. My team is made of very kind and humble people. So we admit our mistakes, and I try to encourage that kind of thing in general.
Amazing. Sounds like a great culture.
Thank you.
And what's one skill you've learned in your career that you think has taken you further or had the most impact on your ability to do your job?
I think it's hard to realize one skill that has been very impactful in my career, but if something I was thinking about was, at some point I had the luck to go to an influencing course, and it was focusing a lot on communication skills. And to mention one particular one that I noticed that I had practiced after the course, and actually worked and I saw it work and it was like a clicking moment for me was pulling information when and I can explain a little bit more what it is. If you're arguing with someone whether approach A is the right thing to do or not, we typically want to convince other people by pushing and pushing and pushing our ideas and our arguments onto others. That usually doesn't work. And it's not good for the conversation either. What really works is to pull information from the other person and ask a lot of questions and practice active listening. And that's something I've learned. I try to apply it more, and I think it really worked. I think I still apply it, but I can probably do it more than now that I'm thinking about it. And that's something that's been super, super important.
Amazing, thank you. I think my eyes lit up as you said that, because that sounds like Neil Rackham's theories that he explored at BA, and that's exactly what we use in our influencing training, is that push and pull and going green and trying to make the conversation about the other person.
Exactly, it was green and blue, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, green, blue, and red. Oh, that's amazing. I love that that's spread around.
Nice.
And so what has surprised you most about being a CTO?
The amount of things I've learned in a very short amount of time. I think that has been a very interesting part. To give an example, I used to do a lot of interviews as a backend engineer, and they were technical interviews, right? So when it was my time to be the manager and the hiring manager, I thought, well, I've done a lot of interviews in my life, so I probably know how this works. No, I didn't. Suddenly you get to see other things that you thought that you knew how they work, but you didn't know. So suddenly I got to practice how do you get a person from the first call that usually is done by human resources for you. How do you do that effectively? How do you sell your company to someone who has applied to your job, or maybe someone who you have sourced, and you get to see all the process end to end. And just by doing all these things that I have never done before, I've learned a lot. And this is one example, but I have like many of these. Just the amount of learning I've done just by having to lead these things and do them myself has been incredible.
Amazing. I'm sure there's a lot of hiring managers out there as we see what the job market is like now. Do you have any tips or tricks that you've picked up for anyone who might be listening to this?
Well, one could be pulling information versus pushing. I was doing my interviews, the first interview that you have with a candidate, I used to do it in a very pushing way. I would tell them this monologue of all the things I needed to say in that interview. And after a while, I realized that it's better to do a big pull first, understand what the person is looking for, what are their challenges they are looking for next, what are the things they were missing before, and use that to see, of course, if it's going to fit or not, and also if how your company will fulfill those needs, for example.
Amazing, thank you. And how important were soft skills in your career?
I think they were very important. Building relationships with your team is important, of course. If we are talking about promoting, having more impact, and so on, you need to learn how to communicate well. You need to communicate well to not just technical people and your peers, but also to management, to product owners, to customers. So communication skills are super important. Building relationships is important. Solving conflicts as well. Influencing, as I said, regarding the course that I did. All of these things combined give you a higher potential for getting more responsibility and having more impact in an organization, right? And that's probably what you want to do if you want to, regardless of whether you want to become a principal engineer and go on the pure technical path or towards the management path. In both cases, those kind of skills are super important.
Perfect, thank you. And what resources, books, videos, podcasts do you recommend to your team that you can also recommend to the listeners?
I'm not a very big fan of podcasts for some reason. I don't know why. I prefer traditional radio, but I do like to read sometimes about technical stuff or like skills that I can develop, or even psychology. And one of the books I think would be interesting is the Manager's Path from Camille Fournier. I found that very interesting because also it's very specific. It gives you specific things you can do at any stage of your career to improve. So that was a really good read. And my other recommendation would be specific courses. I think if one wants to practice, for example, communication skills, finding a seminar or course where you actually practice it is going to be the most effective thing. Public speaking, for example, can be also interesting.
Amazing, thank you. So not only does a CTO need to manage people and product, but you also need to be commercially minded too. Was this something that you had to learn? And if so, how did you learn it?
I think for this question, you mean commercially as in like selling and so on, or is it more of product mindset, thinking about the user? It's more like selling.
I think a little bit of both. I think, always thinking of the commercial side of what you're building in terms of how customers will interact with it, but also how you can, the value it'll bring, so how you can sell it as well, I suppose.
Okay. How I learned this, I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things that you learn and later on you realize that you're applying that knowledge that came from another part of your experience. I think at some point I learned that to care about the user, because often as developers you start with caring a lot about the technology itself because it's so fascinating that you care about the languages that you use, you care about how to do it, and it's your craft, and it's almost like that's the only thing you care about. And then you expand a little bit and you realize that you're using that craft and those languages and those technical solutions to build something for someone or to fulfill a need, right? And when you start expanding in that, that's when you start thinking about the product, you start to have customer empathy, and that mindset where things are driven by the problem you're trying to solve for that person. I think that change is very important. And regarding a commercial mindset, more of a sales mindset, say, I think I'm kind of learning more of that now. And the way I'm learning this is because I have a really good coach on that, David, who teaches me about how to sell things. And that applies also in interviews, right? We need to sell Roadie and sell the job as much as we need to sell the product to our customers.
Thank you. And how did you improve on your customer empathy?
I think talking to them is one good way. One of the moments I think I increased that was when I had the opportunity to do user research with the UX designers and UX researchers in Spotify. We had this little room, looks like the police room. You have a one-way mirror, and you have someone with a person who hasn't seen perhaps your feature, your proof of concept before, and you ask them questions and you see them interacting with it. And then you kind of want to help that person, right? So when you go back to the drawing room, you start to think, okay, the person didn't understand this part of the feature so well. What can I do to make it more clear? And that interaction, I think, made me grow in that sense quite a bit. So I would say just talking to them.
Amazing. Thank you. And so imposter syndrome seems to be something that developers deal with at every level. Does it ever go away? And if not, how do you combat it?
No, it doesn't go away. I think if it does go away, it's because you're not growing enough or quickly enough. If you don't feel like that anymore, you're probably too comfortable. And well, people can do as they like. You can also stay where you are if you want. But if you do want to grow, you need to be uncomfortable. And the moment that happens, you are going to get imposter syndrome. I was talking to one of my mentors recently, and I was telling him about the problem. And he said, Martina, what you're talking about is imposter syndrome. And if you didn't have that, I would think you're a very strange outlier or have some mental issue like narcissism or something. So it's pretty normal. Get used to that.
Amazing.
So that's what I do. Try to make peace with that.
Yeah. And like you said, it can be a good thing and a sign that you are growing and you're in the growth zone.
Yeah. And I think just being comfortable with the idea that sometimes you will second guess yourself, and it's good because then you will ask for feedback to your peers. So yeah, or fake it till you make it. It's the other thing I do.
Yeah. Great. And what advice would you give someone who aspires to be a CTO?
I think start practicing that customer empathy, the product mindset or thinking, the commercial thinking as well. I would say it's important to at least once have gotten a very deep understanding of a project that was complicated. Start practicing leadership skills, getting a good coach. That's going to help a lot. And something that was promoted as well in other organizations I worked for before was thinking about the company, not just your own or your team. So I think as a junior developer, as I was saying before, you care about the language that you work on and what you do day to day. But every time you need to make a decision, you can practice to say, okay, I have several alternatives, but from all of these, which ones are better for my team rather than myself? And then you expand a little bit, and then you grow, and then next time you have another decision to make and you have several choices, you think, okay, what is better for my department? And choose what's better for the department as a bigger organization rather than your team alone. And then the next step is when you make choices, you start making those for the whole company instead of just your team or just your department. And that kind of thinking of having a bigger impact, that's also something that one could practice along their career.
Amazing. I love that. Great mindset to have. And what do you think are some of the most underappreciated skills for people that you hire as engineers?
For example, collaboration skills, knowing how to effectively collaborate with your team, or knowing how to effectively collaborate with other team. Like if someone is a tech lead and they have to coordinate two teams, for example, or like your team and an external one, how do you deal with those interactions? How do you make sure that you're talking often enough and so on? Conflict resolution skills as well. that is tricky. You need to get a really good manager and coach to properly learn to do that, I guess. Some people have it naturally, of course, but it can be, I think it's a difficult thing to do. But it can be learned. And empathy, not just for other developers, but also for customers.
Perfect, thank you. And what were the best teams you worked on and managed, and why?
Best team I've managed, of course, my current team. They are a group of very talented, kind, and helpful developers. And it's a pleasure to work with them. And as for teams I've worked with as another developer, I need to mention my first team in Spotify, Rafiki, because we were very connected. We just had a lot of fun working together. We were very close, and yeah, it was a really nice experience. Very special team.
And what kind of things do you look for in an interview process?
For my candidates, I observe like if they communicate clearly, if they can explain complex problems in a way that is simple, can they summarize things, can they simplify, can they collaborate with other people, do they have examples of collaboration, conflict resolution, as well as I said before, analytical skills, empathy is something I look for. If they had a conflict with anyone else, did they display empathy for that person as well? Do they have the mindset of thinking about the user needs when they are building something? So a little bit of what I mentioned earlier, I think.
Amazing, thank you. And are you hiring at the moment? And if so, how should people get in touch for this?
Yes, I am hiring an infrastructure engineer who has knowledge of AWS. And to get in touch, they can perhaps email me at martina@roadie.io. And yeah, I will reach out to them.
Amazing. Great. I think that is all of the questions that I have. So thank you so much, Martina. This has been wonderful chatting with you, and I really appreciate you giving us your time today.
Of course, thank you. It was very interesting to talk to you as well.